Welcome to the channel, where today we plunge headfirst into one of the most perplexing and electrifying mysteries ever to haunt the numismatic world. A story so rich with intrigue and riddled with unanswered questions that it has consumed collectors for decades, centering around a seemingly ordinary yet impossibly extraordinary 1997 D Washington quarter, a coin that at first glance appears like any other loose change rattling in a pocket, yet upon closer inspection reveals a labyrinth of minting oddities, historical quirks, and production anomalies so bizarre they read more like a spy thriller than a chapter in American coinage. And we begin by asking you this: what if a tiny, almost invisible mistake, born in the hidden, humming corridors of the Denver Mint, slipped past layers of quality control and oversight, quietly escaping into circulation to become one of the rarest and most hotly debated pieces ever struck? A coin whose very existence hints at secrets the U.S. Mint never intended the public to know, and whose peculiarities raise hair-raising questions about what was really happening inside those massive steel doors in 1997. In a year when technology was advancing, but human error remained stubbornly present. When politics, budget cuts, and institutional pressures might have created the perfect storm for overlooked mishaps, strange procedural shortcuts, or even deliberate experimental strikes. And as we peel back the layers of this mystery, we are met with whispers of misplaced dies, ghostly impressions of Washington's profile lurking faintly beside the intended design, as if the metal somehow remembered earlier strikes, shadow devices that defy physics, mint marks that seem to float or fade, as if they were an afterthought, and Planchet flaws that produce strange textures under magnification, almost like a hidden code stamped into the surface by accident. Or was it by design? Because some theories suggest that what we see on certain 1997 D quarters is not simply the result of a tired die or a misaligned collar, but a glimpse into a highly confidential test run of experimental striking techniques never disclosed to the public. A theory fueled by specimens showing doubled features so subtle they seem to disappear unless tilted under the exact angle of light. Coins with a faint outline of an extra letter or device where none should be. And even more astonishing, coins where the designer's initials appear to vanish entirely, swallowed into the metal as though erased by an invisible hand. Yet when studied under the right equipment, faint ghost-like traces re-emerge, hinting at an intentional modification later undone, leading to speculation about whether an internal directive ordered certain coins to be altered mid-production, and why some escaped before the changes were finalized. And the deeper we dive, the stranger it gets, as old mint workers, now long retired, quietly recall rumors of a troubled die that kept producing off-center strikes no matter how it was adjusted, and of a striking press that inexplicably left a hair-thin doubling on only certain coins in a run. Inconsistencies so sporadic they were dismissed at the time as unimportant, only to surface years later as key clues. And this trail takes us back into the shadowy history of the mint itself, where secrecy has often cloaked mistakes and accidents, where small runs of flawed coins were sometimes destroyed, sometimes quietly released to avoid costly remelting, and sometimes hidden away, leading to persistent whispers of vaults containing boxes of experimental strikes from the 1990s that have never been inventoried for public record. And yet, somehow, a handful of these coins reached ordinary people, dropping into soda machines, being handed out as change in convenience stores, slipping unknowingly into coin jars where they might still lie undisturbed, waiting for the day an unsuspecting person notices something odd. The mint, marked slightly too low, the eagle's tail feathers blurred in a way the master hubs never showed, the rim oddly thick in places as though the collar die shifted mid-strike. And each of these anomalies spins off new questions. Was the die damage caused by improper installation, or was the coin struck on a leftover blank from a previous year? An accident that somehow passed unnoticed? And if so, why do some examples show a metallic composition under microscopic analysis that doesn't perfectly match the official 1997 D specifications, as though a small batch was struck on experimental planchets? possibly leftover stock from a foreign contract or an abandoned commemorative project. And here is where the story slides from the merely unusual into the downright uncanny. Because the patterns of these anomalies are inconsistent across known specimens, suggesting not a single error event, but multiple distinct occurrences, almost as if the 1997 Washington quarter became a silent dumping ground. For every oddball mistake, die trial, and half-finished experiment the Denver Mint didn't want to record officially. And if that's true, then what we're dealing with isn't just a rare error coin. It's a layered archaeological site in metal, a timeline of hidden events recorded in microscopic flaws. Each scratch and misalignment a breadcrumb leading back to a moment someone inside the mint hoped would go unnoticed. And yet here we are, decades later, noticing, obsessing, connecting dots that were never meant to align, fueled by collector lore and the unshakable suspicion that somewhere out there lies a 1997 quarter that ties it all together. The specimen that contains every anomaly in one piece. A coin that could rewrite the hidden history of U.S. coin production in the late 20th century. And this is why the hunt never stops. Why collectors scan through rolls of quarters with a kind of intensity usually reserved for decoding classified documents. Because every new discovery, a feint, die clash, a partial collar strike, a ghostly doubling, feels like a piece of a puzzle too big and too strange to be coincidence. And as the stories pile up, from the man who swears he found one in change during a road trip only to have it vanish the next day, to the estate auction where an unmarked envelope contained a quarter with a mint-marked style that doesn't match any official punch used in 1997, to the researcher who claims to have seen a Denver Mint memo from that year warning of unacceptable variances in quarter production that mysteriously disappeared from archives. The legend grows, blurring the line between fact and theory, until you're left asking not just how these anomalies happened, but whether they were meant to happen, and if so, what purpose they served. And with each unanswered question the obsession deepens, because somewhere out there, in a desk drawer, in a forgotten coin jar, maybe even in the change you get back tomorrow, could be the coin that closes the loop on one of the most baffling, captivating, and enduring mysteries in all of modern American coinage. The enigmatic, error-laden, shadow-stamped, and endlessly debated 1997 Washington quarter. A coin whose story refuses to end, whose secrets may never be fully revealed, but whose allure ensures that the search will go on as long as there are hands willing to sift through the change, eyes sharp enough to catch the impossible, and minds curious enough to wonder how a single small disc of metal could hold within it the fingerprints of history, secrecy, and human imperfection all at once. Next we dive into a mystery so entangled with history, secrecy, and pure numismatic obsession that it has fascinated, frustrated, and haunted collectors for decades. A mystery that begins with a single year burned into the annals of American coinage history. 1965. A year when the U.S. Mint stood at a crossroads of technological change, political pressure, and public distrust. A year when the silver was stripped from quarters. When the very composition of the coin in your pocket was rewritten. When the Washington quarter was reborn in copper-nickel-clad form. And yet amid this monumental transition emerged strange, unexplainable, and sometimes downright eerie anomalies that have continued to fuel speculation and ignite treasure hunts to this very day. Because what if, in the middle of this upheaval, a small mistake? No, not just one mistake, but a cascade of them, created one of the rarest coins ever struck. A coin that exists not just as a piece of metal, but as a cryptic record of a turbulent chapter in minting history. And as we peel back the layers of this story, we're confronted with tantalizing evidence of off-metal strikes that should never have happened. Planchets of old silver composition somehow slipping through into the presses months after silver production had supposedly ended. Mint marks, or in some cases the ghostly suggestion of mint marks, appearing in a year when official records say none were struck. Die clashes that left faint, almost spectral outlines of reverse elements imprinted on the obverse, as though the coin were whispering a secret from the other side. and strange doublings so fine and so hidden that even seasoned collectors can overlook it without magnification. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, and these anomalies raise questions far beyond mere accident. How could such errors escape detection in a year when the mint was under intense scrutiny for its metal changeover? What did it say about the chaos within those walls as workers rushed to meet demand while dealing with new blank compositions, new striking pressures, and possibly experimental dyes? And the more we investigate, the stranger it becomes, because archival whispers and collector lore suggest that the Denver and Philadelphia facilities might have both been involved in unofficial test runs, possibly creating hybrid coins with characteristics from two different minting hubs. And if such coins exist, they represent not only mechanical errors but a direct breach of official protocol, a breach that would have been quietly buried if discovered internally, which leads us to stories of confidential memos warning of unacceptable variances in 1965 quarter production, memos that some researchers claim to have seen but which have long since vanished from the archives, and the accounts from retired mint workers who, decades later, quietly admit to having handled quarters that didn't look right. Coins with rims too thick on one side and too thin on the other, collars that left incomplete reading, strikes that were just off-center enough to feel deliberate, and the most chilling of all, planchets that rang like silver when dropped on a counter despite the official end of silver quarters months before, suggesting that either leftover blanks were used in secret or a batch of old planchets was intentionally fed into the presses to use them up, a theory that gains weight when you realize that the transition year was a logistical nightmare, with millions of coins being struck in multiple facilities under rushed and often chaotic circumstances. And then there's the matter of the ghost-like devices, faint, shadowed impressions of letters or numbers that seem to exist just under the surface of certain 1965 quarters, visible only under extreme lighting, almost like the coin is hiding a previous strike underneath, leading some to speculate about overstrikes on older coins, perhaps a covert cost-saving measure, or a last-minute emergency to meet production quotas. And each time a collector finds one of these shadow-marked pieces, the community erupts in speculation, theories flying about whether they're simply worn die anomalies or evidence of something far more deliberate. And as you follow these threads, you inevitably come across the most outlandish yet oddly persistent rumor of them all. That somewhere in the bowels of the mint during that year, experimental dies with prototype features were used briefly before being swapped out, producing a handful of coins with subtle differences in Washington's profile, the spacing of Liberty, or even the alignment of the reverse eagle, differences so minute they would pass casual inspection yet scream wrong to an expert's eye. And when these coins surface, they're like ghosts from a parallel timeline, artifacts from a version of history we weren't supposed to see. And so the hunt continues, with collectors pouring through rolls, scanning change, attending estate sales, looking for those telltale signs, the misaligned rim, the barely there doubling, the unusual ring tone when dropped, the texture of the metal under magnification. Each discovery adding a new twist to the saga, because the truth is we may never know how many varieties of 1965 quarter exist or how many anomalies are still hiding in circulation. But we do know this. Every time one is found, it forces us to question what we thought we knew about that pivotal year, about the competence and transparency of the mint, about the boundaries between error, experiment, and intentional deception. And that is why the 1965 Washington quarter remains not just a collectible, but an obsession, a cipher, a coin that continues to pull us deeper into its story with every clue we uncover. A story that may never be complete, yet refuses to let go of those who dare to follow its trail. Next, we plunge into one of the most perplexing and enduring mysteries in modern numismatics, a story that begins with the unassuming but deeply enigmatic 1990 P. Washington quarter, a coin that on the surface seems like just another piece of pocket change, but beneath its ordinary appearance carries a storm of unanswered questions, technical anomalies, and whispered legends that have kept collectors awake at night for decades. Because what if a small, almost imperceptible mistake during its creation transformed it into one of the rarest and most mysterious coins ever struck by the U.S. Mint? A piece that slipped quietly into circulation, carrying with it the fingerprints of bizarre manufacturing mishaps, overlooked inconsistencies, and perhaps even deliberate acts cloaked in secrecy. And as we peel back the layers of its story, we are drawn deeper into the inner workings of the Philadelphia Mint in 1990. A year marked by intense production schedules, ongoing adjustments to die preparation methods, and whispers of experimental striking processes that never made it into the official record, all of which form the perfect backdrop for the strange events surrounding this coin. And here's where it begins to get truly unsettling. Among the 1990 P quarters that have been studied by experts and obsessives alike, there are examples exhibiting die clashes so faint they resemble ghostly echoes of the reverse eagle imprinted across Washington's face. Mint marks that appear distorted, doubled, or even entirely absent, despite the fact that the P was supposed to be consistently present on all Philadelphia strikes of the era. Planchet surfaces displaying inexplicable granular textures as though the metal itself was contaminated or improperly prepared, and in some cases rims that swell unevenly, suggesting collar malfunctions or misaligned strikes that should have been caught by quality control, but somehow weren't. And the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. Because in certain specimens under magnification you can find shadow devices. Faint, almost spectral outlines of lettering or design elements that shouldn't exist, leading to speculation about whether these coins were accidentally overstruck on previously minted quarters or on experimental planchets never meant to see public release. And such a possibility opens a Pandora's box of theories, ranging from sloppy die maintenance to intentional destruction of older stock that went awry, to the chilling idea that these might be remnants of secret die trials, pieces struck not for circulation but for internal testing, only to be accidentally, or deliberately, released into the wild. And if that sounds far-fetched, consider the rumors from former Mint employees who claimed that in 1990 there were irregularities in the die engraving process, including the creation of dies with subtle spacing differences in the lettering of Liberty, shifts in Washington's hair details, and reverse designs that appeared slightly off-center compared to the master hub. Variances so minute that they could pass casual inspection, but which under the obsessive scrutiny of a numismatist stand out like a beacon. And this is where the legend grows, because every collector who finds an unusual 1990 P quarter adds a new layer to the mystery. The coin discovered in a bank roll with no visible mint mark at all. The one pulled from a pocket that had a faint doubled profile on Washington's chin and jawline. The quarter whose reverse eagle's talons were inexplicably blurry while the rest of the design was sharp, and the coin whose obverse rim was thicker on one side than the other, as if the strike had been frozen mid-impact. And when you put all these anomalies together, you begin to see patterns that hint at a chaotic or experimental production environment. One where dies were being swapped hastily, collars adjusted without precision, and planchets of uncertain origin fed into presses that might have been calibrated differently for certain test runs. And as the stories continue to circulate, we encounter the tantalizing possibility that some of these quarters may have been struck on leftover planchets from earlier years. Perhaps even foreign contract planchets that found their way into domestic production. A theory bolstered by metallurgical tests from a handful of privately held specimens that allegedly showed slight deviations from the expected copper-nickel clad composition. And if those reports are true, then the 1990 P quarter isn't just an error coin. It's an unintentional time capsule, a piece of metal that shouldn't exist in the form it does, and that's what makes it so irresistible to treasure hunters. The idea that somewhere in the endless churn of everyday currency lies a coin that doesn't fit the official narrative, a coin that defies the neat order of mint records, a coin that could rewrite a small but significant chapter of American coinage history. And so the hunt never stops, with collectors scouring bank rolls, flea markets, old cash drawers, and inherited jars of change. their eyes trained to spot the minute irregularities that could signal they've stumbled onto a piece of this puzzle. And each new find sparks debates in forums, deep dives into variety catalogs, and the occasional whispered claim from someone who says they've seen a specimen with anomalies so extreme that they refuse to show it publicly for fear of it vanishing into private hands or being dismissed as impossible. And yet this is exactly why the 1990 Washington quarter has transcended its humble role as a circulating coin and become an enduring enigma. Because every shadow device, every invisible initial, every misaligned rim, and every blurred detail feels like a clue, a fragment of a larger, hidden story about the U.S. Mint's inner workings during that year. And whether these anomalies were the result of mechanical failure, human error, bureaucratic oversight, or a deliberate act lost to time, they've left behind a trail of mystery that refuses to fade, ensuring that the legend of the 1990 quarter will continue to grow as long as there are those willing to sift through the ordinary in search of the extraordinary. Those who believe that the most profound discoveries are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to find them. Next, we unravel a numismatic mystery that has held collectors captive for decades. A story that begins in 1982 with the striking of the Philadelphia Mint's Washington quarter. A year and a coin that would come to be surrounded by an aura of secrecy, anomalies, and whispered legends. Because what if a small mistake, born deep within the humming corridors of the U.S. Mint, set in motion a chain of events that turned an otherwise ordinary piece of circulating currency into one of the most enigmatic and hotly debated coins in modern American history, and not just because of a single error, but because of an avalanche of strange, often contradictory clues left embedded in its very surface, clues that suggest not just human error, but possibly intentional acts, experimental strikes, or even deliberate cover-ups. And as we plunge into this tangled web, we find ourselves in the early 1980s, a period when the Mint was under pressure to modernize production methods, keep up with high demand, and streamline costs. Yet in 1982 something happened in Philadelphia that left behind a trail of anomalies too numerous and too odd to explain away as mere chance, beginning with the fact that many 1982 quarters appear with faint, distorted, or even entirely absent mint marks, a detail that on its own might be dismissed as dye fatigue or grease-filled cavities, but which becomes much harder to dismiss when paired with the other peculiarities found on certain specimens, including ghostly shadow devices that seem to reveal faint outlines of letters or design elements from previous strikes, doubling so fine and irregular that it evades all traditional classifications, and Planchet surfaces that under magnification reveal strange striations, granular patches, and uneven textures more reminiscent of experimental blanks than standard copper-nickel-clad stock. And as collectors began to notice these irregularities, questions multiplied. How could such errors pass through quality control in a year when the Mint was already in the spotlight for other coinage issues? Why do some examples show misaligned strikes with rims that taper unnaturally from one side to the other? And why do a small number of surviving coins appear to have been struck with reverses that do not perfectly match the master hub specifications for that year, as though a transitional or leftover reverse design was pressed into service for reasons never officially documented? And the deeper one digs, the stranger it becomes, because certain 1982 quarters display dye clashes that leave haunting, almost spectral impressions of reverse details across Washington's face. Others exhibit an uncanny absence of the designer's initials, as if they had been softly erased from the die. And still others feature partial collar strikes that give the coin an off-center, almost misshapen feel in hand. Yet despite all these clear anomalies, there exists no official Mint explanation, only silence and That silence has grown a dense forest of theories. Some argue that leftover planchets from earlier years were accidentally fed into the presses. Others claim that the Philadelphia Mint was conducting internal striking experiments that accidentally spilled into public circulation. And still others insist that a batch of dies intended for internal testing was mistakenly installed in production presses, striking a small run of coins before being discovered and removed, and fueling this speculation are the rare first-hand accounts from former Mint employees who have hinted, often in guarded language, that 1982 was a year when procedural shortcuts were taken, when machines were pushed to their limits, and when certain batches of coins were quietly pulled and destroyed for reasons never disclosed. Reasons that might explain why some 1982 P quarters seem to have vanished while others remain tantalizingly elusive. And then there are the documented, yet still unexplained variations. In lettering alignment, feather detailing on the reverse eagle, and the exact positioning of the date. Differences so slight that they might escape a casual glance, but which leap out at trained eyes. And when all these factors are combined, they paint a picture not of a single, isolated error, but of a chaotic, experimental, and possibly secretive production environment where multiple factors converge to create a coin unlike any other in the Washington Quarter series. A coin that seems to exist in multiple subtle variations, each telling a slightly different version of the same mysterious story. And this is why the hunt for the 1982 P quarter has taken on an almost obsessive quality among seasoned collectors, because each discovery, whether it's a no-mint mark example with pristine details, a double die obverse so faint it vanishes unless tilted just right, or a specimen with a collar defect that subtly warps the reading, feels like a key to unlocking a larger truth about what was happening inside the mint that year. And yet the more pieces are found, the more questions arise, as if the coin itself is a riddle designed never to be fully solved. A reminder that even in an age of precision machinery and strict oversight, human error, secrecy, and the unpredictable nature of metal under pressure can combine to produce something wholly unique. And so the legend of the 1982 P Washington Quarter continues to grow. Its anomalies documented in notebooks, its mysteries debated in online forums and at coin shows, its most extreme examples quietly changing hands among collectors who know that they are holding a fragment of history, a sliver of a story that was never meant to be told, and somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten jar of change, a dusty bankroll, or the till of a corner store, the next piece of this puzzle may still be waiting, bearing the invisible scars, ghostly impressions, and inexplicable details that tie it to a year of quiet chaos inside the Philadelphia Mint, a year whose full story remains locked in the metal of a coin that refuses to give up all its secrets.